Welcome to Uncovered. And it's the morning after the night before. It's Wednesday as we respond live to the speech that you just heard from Vice President Kamala Harris, but also to the results of the election, which, as you know, are very disappointing for any of us who are in the pro-democracy camp. I'm Anthony Davis. He's Ron Filipkowski, editor-in-chief of MidasTouch.com. We've been very busy over the last 24 hours, haven't we, trying to piece together this election as it unfolded. We all started quite optimistic. And Ron, you know, this is something that I think we are having to come to terms with, is that did we mistakenly think that Kamala Harris had this election in the bag? I mean, is this our own naivety that we jumped the gun and didn't consider the fact that the people that she was speaking to did actually leave out some social groups?
Well, I never said she had it in the bag. I never thought that at all. I thought it was going to be razor close and it was all going to come down to Pennsylvania and Arizona. That's what I thought, you know. I'm a little surprised that Wisconsin and Michigan went for Trump. That was really surprising because we won the Senate race in Michigan. There's Democratic governors in those, and Pennsylvania too. You know, Pennsylvania, we had a Democratic governor there. So yeah, it was a little surprising. I think the numbers were I mean, there's clearly three or four demographics there where Trump really picked up a significant chunk of votes over what he had in 2020. So, I mean, it's pretty easy to zero in on where the problems were. What's a little more complicated is like how to win those people back.
Yeah. You wrote an article on MidasTouch.com. And you started with the point of this article is not to wallow in misery or feel sorry for ourselves or start finger pointing. At the same time, we have to face some hard truths about where we are as a party and how a 78-year-old right-wing populist demagogue widely rejected by voters just 4 years ago could win so many votes despite election denialism, an attempted coup, felony convictions, and obvious cognitive decline. I mean, when you put it like that, I think that's why so many of us had this false sense of security. And look, I'll put my hands up. I genuinely felt that the Harris movement was the antidote to all of the hatred and the pox of Trumpism. It's clear now that the timing of Joe Biden stepping aside and giving her not more really than 100 days to pull this campaign together has been detrimental. And just from a name recognition perspective, you know, most people, and we need to remind our viewers that most people are not interested in politics. They do not care. They don't look at the feeds. They're just not involved. They don't read the newspapers. They might catch a bit of Facebook or a bit of Joe Rogan, but the reality is that they're not engaged. And so when it comes to name recognition, I'm sure there's a good number of people who couldn't even tell you who the vice president was, let alone maybe they thought Trump was the president. I don't know. But clearly that low information voter that we have spoken so much about, it's infectious. Clearly, people are just done with old school politics.
Because, I mean, when you think about it, in the primary in 2020, she was out pretty fast, right? Yeah. She was one of the first out. And there was a lot of people sharing that stage back then. So she didn't get a whole lot of airtime back then. And then you're talking about 4 years she's the VP and there's virtually no visibility for her in that role whatsoever. You never saw her. She wasn't ever on TV or anything.
Through no fault of her own, we should say.
No.
She was having to babysit the Senate, and she was ultimately involved in the administration and saving us from scandals. And the administration ran a pretty tight ship.
Yep. And they had a very ambitious, huge legislative agenda. You had, the Ukraine war going on, the Afghan pullout, all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, she got sidelined like most VPs do. So she has 3.5 months, right, to like introduce herself to the American people. And let's not forget, the first month, they pretty much had her do nothing. She didn't do any interviews. She didn't do much. And yet, we saw that poll bounce because I think that a lot of voters were just so happy to have somebody else besides Biden, Trump.
Yeah.
But then, I think that there was a lot of factors involved that I put in my article that caused several. I think that the seeds of the loss were planted back in 21 and 22. I really firmly believe that. There were a lot of things that were happening back then that I was raging about behind the scenes privately that I wouldn't share publicly because I'm a team player and I don't do that. But privately I was sharing my concerns about several different things to a lot of people. And I think that when you look at the demographics that went against us, it was exactly for those reasons. So I think it was less to do, if she had a primary, then we could have found out if she had what it takes to survive a primary, or maybe Democratic voters would have chosen somebody else. We don't know. So this has never happened before in American history where somebody was nominated without a primary, and since George Washington was, that's it.
But the Republicans seized on that.
We didn't know what was going to happen.
The Republicans seized on that. I don't think the Democrats were that bothered that she didn't have a primary. She was, her candidacy at the DNC seemed to be widely accepted.
Yep.
But the Republicans seized on it, and they said that she is an unelected candidate, and they tried to make the point that it was a coup, like some kind of
illegitimate
takeover of the leadership under the feet of Joe Biden. Now, it wasn't that, but that's how it looked. And I think there was a lot of confusion there. And they wrote the narrative. The Democrats didn't bother. In fact, maybe this is a theme of the Democrats, is that they don't fill in the gaps. And the problem is, if you don't fill in the gaps, the other side is going to fill them in for you.
Yeah, I mean, they wrote the narrative like across the board on almost every issue.
Yeah.
I would say with the exception of abortion, but abortion, I don't think went as far as what Democrats thought it was going to. It didn't get young men voters. It probably hurt Democrats with Latino Catholic voters. I think we saw that. That was the biggest shift. And I think, a hardline position on abortion hurts with those voters. And I don't think that just on every other issue, whether it was migrant crime or, inflation, gas prices, the Republicans were always setting the narrative and Democrats were always responding. The Democrats' narrative was like democracy, January 6th, and abortion for the most part. That's where they were like aggressive. But I think that's only going to get you so far.
The other thing that you mentioned in the article, which I think is a very good point, is the withdrawal of Afghanistan was really turned into a major kind of manifesto pledge from Donald Trump that, it was a disaster. The way that Democrats handled it was a disaster. They should have taken the equipment out first. He just basically rewrote the story. And none of it was true. And including the amount of money that he claims we'd kind of left behind, which actually was so wide of the mark. But Joe Biden never stepped up and corrected the record on that. Again, they just left it out, and by leaving it out, Donald Trump filled it in.
Think about this. Donald Trump was down for the count at that time. He was on the mat. Coming out of January 6th, washes up at Mar-a-Lago. No one will go near him with the exception of Kevin McCarthy. Nobody wants to talk to him. He basically was almost friendless at that point,
right.
Having just lost. The Afghan withdrawal happens, and he is a master at seizing upon an opportunity to capitalize on a tragedy. That's one thing we know he's great at.
Right.
He finds
9/11 was the
something
same.
bad happens. He's like the ambulance chaser of politics. Yeah. He shows up at the scene of the crime and, puts his arm around the victim, takes all the glory. And literally he saw in the Afghan withdrawal what happened there, which was the chaotic withdrawal, an opportunity to jump out and say, and just start his fire hose of lies about everything, about how I would have taken out every bolt, every screw. We abandoned all these people. We got all these Marines killed. And And really, I thought it was extremely easy for the administration to come out and address his arguments and shoot them down one by one forcefully. However, they took the strategy with him like they did so many other times back then in 2021, 22, was we don't care about this guy anymore. He's finished. He's over. The Republicans are never going to nominate him again. He's done. So we're going to ignore him. And that was an enormous mistake. And it started right there, because then what he could do is build on that. He could say, this shows the whole world that Biden is weak. And then when Russia invades Ukraine, he linked that to Afghanistan. And he said, the only reason Putin went into Ukraine is because he saw how weak we were in Afghanistan. Boom. And again, the Biden administration does not respond to him. They time and time again, they chose the strategy to ignore Trump. And that basically let Trump get off the mat.
Democrats like to play by the rules. Republicans threw the rule book out in 2016. And I think that, to me, has been a bit of a theme. And I think Democrats always thought that by sticking to the rules, it would kind of steady the ship and maybe bring the country back on track and counteract the insanity and the lack of protocols that Trump had. Would you,
especially Joe Biden and Merrick Garland had that attitude,
right? Being traditionalists,
yep.
and relying on the Constitution, relying on the, just on America being upstanding and thinking that that's enough. But Trump is the antithesis of an upstanding America. He wants to smash it down. And that, by nature of the people who are not engaged in politics, they will see that as being more action and no action coming out of the White House or the DOJ.
Well, think about, it's always been a tradition in America in politics for an ex-president never to criticize a sitting president.
Right.
Have you heard anything from George W. Bush about Trump or Biden? Not a word, right? You didn't hear anything from his dad about Bill Clinton after his dad lost to Bill Clinton? Not a peep, right? Not a peep. So that's always been the tradition. And so I think Biden probably thought, well, Trump's not going to jump in here and criticize me on Afghanistan and Ukraine because that's not the patriotic thing to do, you know. But so meanwhile, Trump is out there barking and yapping, and his surrogates are, and Fox News is, while the administration is just taking the high road. Oh, we're not going to address what he's saying because that's all lies. And we'll just ignore this guy down here in Mar-a-Lago. But meanwhile, he's scoring points. He's getting back up off the mat, and people are starting to listen to him again because he's like a running back that's broken through the offensive line and he's into the defensive backfield. He's broken into the clear and he's allowed to run and no one's tackling him.
There's lots of analogies that we could put forward. The one that I was thinking of is if you have a next door neighbor who's like having a party and is noisy. There's two schools of thought. And you're trying to sleep. You either put on your gown and you go next door and you knock on the door and you say, will you turn that down? Or you put earplugs in and an eye mask and you get under the pillow and you just try and ignore it and hope it stops soon.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration opted for the latter.
Yeah. And
actually it is becoming and I respected them for that. I'm not criticizing that, because I also thought that to they go low, we go high, the Michelle Obama analogy, I think that did work to a point. But Donald Trump wasn't just one party in the house next door. He was a whole street party, right?
A block party.
A block party, as you guys call it. Yeah. And it was like a long weekend block party. And the problem with that is that it's infectious. And I feel like doing nothing or saying nothing or taking the high ground or putting your head under the pillow with the earplugs in used to work. But these days, most people are going outside and ringing the next door neighbor's doorbell and filming it for Instagram.
Yeah, and the party didn't break up at like 6 a.m. It just kept going for days and days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And meanwhile, yeah, you have a guy like Joe Biden, this old patrician, boomer scion of the Senate, kind of guy who just doesn't think that the game should be played that way. And so he didn't. And so yeah, that was one of many mistakes, like very early on, that sort of snowballed. And with one thing, whether it's just like blaming the administration for gas prices or the rise, nobody from the administration was out there dealing with Donald Trump's lies. Because like we said, their strategy was, well, we'll just ignore this guy, he'll go away. You can't just like, oh, we'll address all this stuff in like June of 2024. It's like, no, you can't let him lie for 3 years without taking him on.
Let's talk about Joe Biden for a moment, because he did win the election for the Democrats in 2020, and when we look at the numbers, he got more votes than any president in history, right? 82 million. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump didn't even come close to that this time.
No.
Does that suggest to you that a lot of Democrats did not come out to vote?
Yeah, well, there's either one or two theories. Of course, all the Republicans are saying is that this proves that the Democrats cheated in 2020, right? That's their spin.
Well, they can keep that one.
Yeah, that's their spin. But no, I think that it was down for both sides. So either people undervoted. I haven't seen the numbers there. Where undervote basically means like you're voting in every other race, but you're deciding not to vote for president because you don't like either one. I mean, that is a phenomenon. I don't know if that's the case or if it was just a turnout thing. We'll find out that more when we get the numbers. But I don't think it was a situation where like Dem turnout was lower than Republican turnout. I tend not to think that was the issue. I think that the issue was just there were like 3 demographic groups that Dems got killed in that, much worse than last time.
A lot of people are saying that this was an election for women and minorities, and that was really what Kamala Harris was running on, and that maybe the male voters were left out, and that the male voters that she didn't talk to found a home in the Donald Trump camp. Whether it be the toxic masculinity, or whether it just be guys who felt like the Kamala Harris version of the Democrats was something that their wives and girlfriends would be focusing on and voting for.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, with the male demographic, very similar numbers to 16 with Hillary. So either a couple things are going on here. Either there's a lot of men who just won't vote for a woman president. And that's entirely possible. That will never show up in polls because there's no one's going to tell a pollster, I'm not going to vote for a woman. Matter of fact, I don't think a pollster even asked that question. I mean, I don't think they've ever done a poll saying is there a situation where under no circumstances will you vote for a woman? I don't think that's ever really been asked.
Hillary Clinton won the popular vote.
Hillary
Clinton won the popular vote in 2016.
Yeah, I suppose so, but she did very poorly with men. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But she made up for that with women. But but that didn't had to happen that much in 2020. Biden pulled so in other words, like Hillary did very badly with men, Biden did okay, and then we go right back to the Harris doing poorly with men. So that could be it. I mean, I think that's a small sliver of it, but I don't think that's the whole thing, because especially when you look at the numbers, it's especially young men, men under 30. I mean, that's a problem because if they stay Republican, if this wasn't like a one-off kind of thing, if men under 30 are like overwhelmingly going to be Republican from this point forward, that's a serious problem.
I don't think that they were actually voting for Republicans, Ron. I think they were voting for Trump. And I think
split the ticket. Yeah, I mean,
right? Look, there is a difference between.
Look at Arizona.
Yeah.
I mean, Gallego won Arizona.
Yeah.
Look at Michigan. The Democrat won the Michigan Senate race. So you're right. I mean, the other Democratic candidates did better than the top of the ticket.
But these low information voters who voted for Trump, I don't even think that they were necessarily aware that Trump was the Republican Party. They just thought he was Trump. And Trump has taken over the Republican Party. And, you know, we were predicting when we were discussing a potential Harris win, we were saying, well, this will be the end of the GOP because Trump has hijacked it. And if he loses, then the GOP are going to have to build up from the ground up again.
Yes.
Now we're having to have that same conversation about the Democrats. And that is, I mean, that is a huge shift in the narrative.
Yeah. Yep. I just think that there's a lot of things systemic that are issues with the Democratic Party that have to be addressed, have to be talked about, and have to be fixed. And that's my article, you know, was about, is that there's a lot of things in there that maybe Democrats don't agree with, don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. They want to blame something else. They want to say it was Russia calling in the bomb threats, or it was this, it was that. But I really don't think so, because I've been thinking about these things for 4 years now, that watching this shift happen among these blocks of groups. And I've been worried about it. And it's over specific issues. So it's not all just like cult of personality things. There are actually specific issues that are moving these people away from Democrats.
I read somewhere that America is not ready for a European-style politics where there is equality and where, you know, female leaders are normal and abortion rights are normal and you can identify however you like, and, you know, that you aren't discouraged from changing your gender and all of these things that are very normal in Europe, both where I'm from, but certainly, you know, throughout the European Union of Nations. And yet they kind of feel like to bring that neoliberalism to America and force it upon Americans, especially rural Americans. This was like a firm pronouncement that we do not want that stuff. Call it wokeism, whatever you choose to call it, that it is incompatible with America.
Let's just take one issue, the trans issue, and compare that to European politics, right? So Donald Trump spent the number one thing he spent the most money on in ads was migrants. Number two is trans. Think about that. Trump spent over $100 million on anti-trans ads. And how many trans people are? I mean, it's just like such a non-factor in American society. But look, this is 3 years in the making. This began way back when Leah Thomas started swimming in college in the NCAA championships. And Leah was a 6'1", born a male, big, competing against women and breaking records. And, you know, this was something that was on Fox News every single day for a month. Leah Thomas. And they were looking for other trans athletes in volleyball and basketball. And there might have been like a half dozen of them in America out there, but they were all over right-wing media and Fox.
And then there was the boxing in the Olympics, which kind of wrapped it all up.
That it's unfair to women. And then finally in the Olympic Games, once again. And so, but you watch a mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS, you don't see any of that. They don't even mention it. Okay. So I think that a lot of Democrats were just completely unaware that this was a very, very big deal for a big chunk of America. And they really viewed this as a threat to women because it's not just on the playing field. It's also the locker rooms, the bathrooms, the prisons, all of it. So every time a trans person would go into a female prison and there would be a sexual assault involving the trans person, it'd be all over Fox News. And again, these are things that I think Democrats were just not aware of because they don't see it. And let me ask you, would something like that be all over the media in France,
No.
in
No,
an
I mean,
election.
this is the subject we need to get into next, and this is how the major issues that Donald Trump made these hot button issues for his campaign are all fraudulent, right? So the trans issue is a non-issue. Most people are not going to come into contact with trans people, let alone play sports with them. And, I heard Megyn Kelly say recently when she was like rebutting a criticism, and she goes, well, I don't want my daughter going into a woman's bathroom and seeing a man's penis.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, like, is that really what you think? What you think, that trans people expose themselves, right?
That's probably
a
what
woman's
100 million
bathroom is all
Americans think.
stalls. It's like, what are you going to see that's different? This suggestion that trans people are sex offenders or perverts is entirely fabricated by the right that they continue to push. So,
but here's the thing.
Yeah.
Democrats don't want to talk about this issue. They don't want to talk. They didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And every time that Harris got asked about it, she changed the subject. She ran away from it because, you see, what I always wanted Democrats to say and what I wanted her to say was, what does that have to do with me? Like, this is up to each sports league. This is up to the NCAA. This is up to the Olympic Committee. This is up to the volleyball leagues. A president shouldn't be deciding who gets to play in a basketball game. But I think she was afraid to even say that because she's afraid of backlash from trans activists, from LGBTQ activists. I think that if it was sort of explained and said the right way, I think that there would not have been the backlash. But there's the fear of the backlash that paralyzes Democrats from being able to take on Republicans on social issues because they're afraid of maybe a segment of their base when they probably don't need to be afraid of it.
And if you don't deal with the illness, it will spread. And I think that this is the mistake that they made. I mean, there were plenty of opportunities for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or even Karine Jean-Pierre to get up on a stage with half a dozen trans people and just explain what transgenderism is and try and educate like a public service announcement. And I must apologize. I've discovered that the word transgenderism is offensive and was actually created by the right. There is no ism. And I've made that mistake a couple of times.
But again, this goes to the heart of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, because Democrats will argue with each other and yell at each other over what word should be used.
Right.
And that's where you lose young men voters right there.
Sure. But at the same time,
you start lecturing them, you're not supposed to use that word. You're supposed to use this word in their freshman, English class at Penn State. You just lost that voter.
Yeah. Well, fine.
But I know what you're
see
saying,
what you're
but
saying.
I'm just telling you reality.
No, I see what you're saying. But it is interesting that I started to use a word that was generated by the right wing, that they put into the modern vernacular, that I didn't even know because I don't ingest enough of their material to know that that was something they created. And it was a trans person that wrote to me and said, you do realize that if you say the word transgenderism, that you've fallen into their trap. And that's the point that I want to make. So there are other issues in addition to the trans issue, such as, let's use the economy, for example. Now, we know that on paper, the economy is doing considerably well, seeing as we've come out the back of a worldwide pandemic where inflation went up through the roof worldwide, and where if Donald Trump was still the president, we probably wouldn't have recovered as quickly as we did with Joe Biden, putting the country back on track, putting the country back to work. And the problem, though, is that inflation does not go away overnight. It has a lasting effect. There was lots of price gouging, even, landlords putting up rent, trying to claw back money that they'd lost over the last 3 years. And so it just meant that it feels like it is more expensive to live. and wages never caught up with that. And so a lot of people were blaming Joe Biden, Kamala Harris for that. And nothing hurts more than being hurt with your pocket.
When gas prices spiked, right? What was it, in late 21, early 22? What did Republicans do? They went on an orchestrated campaign all over the country, putting Joe Biden stickers on gas pumps, saying, I did that, all over the country. And they posted all the pictures of it on social media and all that. What did Democrats do? Ignored it. I mean, you heard nothing. I remember raging, saying, why isn't anyone in the administration out there explaining to the American public why gas prices have spiked and how this is a worldwide phenomenon and the specific supply chain and other reasons for it? The pent-up demand from the pandemic and all that. There were reasons for it. But while Republicans are out there putting stickers on gas pumps, Democrats said nothing. And then eventually, I remember after griping about this on social media for months and months and months, saying this is what Republicans are saying about gas prices and they're blaming Biden, the Department of Energy, or whatever it is, Department of Transportation, put out a 14-point bullet point paper as to why gas prices are higher. And you know who read that? I think me and maybe like 4 or 5 people in DC, and that's about it.
I mean, we're not here to bash the Democrats, but obviously it is important to do this analysis. And for some, it might feel too soon. And if that's the case, I apologize. But I do believe that people want answers. And that's what I've been hearing. And people have been writing to me all morning and all night about this, saying, what did we do wrong? Where did we miss the mark? How could we have been so wrong about this? And the thing that I find most interesting about it is that come February or March or April next year, when after Donald Trump has been inaugurated and gives a fascist speech, as he's probably going to, like he did last time, that people are going to realize that he can't lower prices in the grocery store. He doesn't have that ability because we have a free market. It's not something, especially for conservatives, to want to make those types of changes. It's just never going to happen. That he can't close the border. It's not possible to close the border. He's been saying it. People have bought into it. But it's not really physically possible unless he invites the military. And I doubt very much if the military are going to want to get involved in these types of affairs. So, I don't know. I just feel like people early next year are going to be like, ooh, could we rerun that election, please? Because now I've realized that everything that Trump was telling me he was going to do, he doesn't actually have the ability to do.
See, so, I mean, for 4 years, I covered Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the MAGA movement and right-wing media, right? So my whole thing is I'm like on a daily basis making Democrats aware of what they're doing and what they're saying and waiting for the response, right? Like, here's what they're saying, guys. Bring the cavalry. Let's go. Let's take these guys on this issue. And it's like crickets. Like, where is everybody? Right? I mean, it was just like, I'll give you another example. We use gas prices. How about eggs? Okay. Eggs. There was a major egg prices spiked in like the end of 2022. So I go online. I'm like, why are egg prices spiking? Well, there was a massive outbreak of avian flu, and they had to euthanize egg-laying chickens, like 1 billion of them all over the United States. That's what caused egg prices to go up. So while Republicans are like, Bidenflation is making egg prices go up, and they're posting cartons of eggs and how much they cost, crickets from Democrats. Crickets. When somebody could have been out there and said, look, we have a major avian flu outbreak. This is what happened. It's going to get better, but for right now, eggs are going to go up. It's just like one thing after another. Republicans are able to hone in and identify, oh, here's something we can exploit and blame Biden for. And Democrats are just like, either like they're unaware of that is happening, or they just feel like, oh, we're not going to play in the muck. That's beneath us. That's silly. Well, it's not silly. It's politics.
And also, like even in the workplace, there's two types of people. There's the people who quietly get on with their work, whose productivity is pretty high. And then there's the person who doesn't really do very much work at all, but makes an awful lot of noise about the fact that they are working, prints out copies of their work and puts it on their boss's desk.
People like that, right?
Right? We've all met people like that.
Sure.
And we're all like, why are they doing it? They don't do anything. I've done half their work for them. That is, I think, the difference between the Trump campaign making all that noise and not doing very much, and Biden quietly working away at maintaining the status quo. And maybe they felt that after the craziness of the Trump administration, with a scandal every day, that people just wanted to get back to normality. And, the point that I used to make, and I've made it a dozen times, is that why isn't Biden getting up and doing these weekly or every 2 weeks doing a press conference where they debunk what the Trump campaign have been saying and actually bring receipts and deal with it in advance, as opposed to fighting a fire and waiting for the guy from Fox to ask the question in the briefing room? It would be much better if they were proactive and they said, okay, this week Trump has said this, and this is why they are incorrect, misinformation and disinformation. And actually...
Baby formula. Remember that? The baby formula. There's no baby formula.
Yeah.
I remember for 9 consecutive days, that was the lead story on Fox, Newsmax, and the administration said nothing.
Yeah.
So they made all these young moms think that their babies are going to starve and scaring the shit out of them with no response from the administration. And the issue was there was there's only 4 baby formula plants in the whole United States.
There was 3 baby formula plants.
And I guess one of them had a fire or something.
One of them got contaminated. And
it's
so
get out in front and explain this to people. Yeah. What's going on? Don't people will understand. They
could also have used that as an opportunity to explain why it's important to not have these monopolies on industries like baby formula. Because when one aspect gets involved in a health crisis, such as a contamination issue in a factory, it screws up the supply chain. And that actually we're much better having more companies and more competition, because they ended up having to import baby formula from Europe on aeroplanes that the administration did. And they didn't make enough of that either, of how they saved people.
I mean, I could give you hundreds of these things. Gas stove, they're coming for your gas stoves, right?
Yeah, crickets.
I mean, the EV man, they're going to take your cars, they're going to take your gun. This is their playbook. And I'm not saying that you always have to play in the mud with them all the time on every single little thing. Some things you can just laugh at that they try, but there are some things that really do get traction with people, and those are the things that they got to be better at. And about this? How about, when's the last time a Democrat got out in front of something before the right started attacking, saying look, gas prices are going to go up next month and here's why? No, we're always reacting. We're always on defense.
Some senators and Congress people were pretty good at this stuff and kind of ran their own social media campaigns. Eric Swalwell, people like that, who just were able to understand how to play this game, this social media game, that where you just shut them up and you stop the noise with some clear facts. Adam Schiff was very good at it as well, despite all the criticism that he took. And it's a shame that the administration didn't operate like that too.
A perfect example of what you just said is the Hunter Biden stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, that, wouldn't you know it, that the administration decided to take really seriously and get out in front of, right? I wonder why that is. Oh, it's Hunter Biden. And so what did they made damn sure, because they knew when the Republicans took over the House that they were going after Hunter Biden and Joe by proxy. So they put their best freaking people on oversight, didn't they? All their stars, they packed oversight. And what happened? They kicked the Republicans' ass in those hearings. They made Comer look like a fool. Raskin, Swalwell, Crockett, we could go right down the line. And that was a perfect, and by the end, they got nothing, no traction whatsoever on Hunter Biden. That's the playbook. That's the example of how Dan Goldman, that's example of how to beat these people at their game. But unfortunately, we really only did that with Hunter Biden.
I do get a sense that a theme of a lot of what we are describing here is that Democrats maybe, and I'm talking about lawmakers rather than voters, feeling that they have a superiority complex and that maybe, that they're above all of that stuff, and that by playing by the rules,
especially the older ones,
right, and doing the right thing and being very traditional, that wins the race.
Yep.
And we saw that with the campaign, the knocking on doors. And, we were saying only 2 days ago that Elon Musk was brought in as a subcontractor to do door knocking for Donald Trump, and half of it never happened. And he still won by a large margin. Yeah. And yet the Democratic grassroots movement was significant doing the door knocking. I mean, Kamala Harris was door knocking in Pennsylvania yesterday afternoon herself. Donald Trump wasn't knocking on doors. And so
our organization was better, but their messaging was better.
But does that mean that the traditional campaigning that was, that is over 150 years old, conceptually, is actually maybe a little out of date? And that the world that we live in now is far more user-generated content?
I think that's an excellent point. I think that the Democrats really need to, all campaigns really, need to take a look at all the traditional methods of persuading voters. TV ads, are these people in Pennsylvania? I just read this from the Philadelphia media source. People in Pennsylvania saw on average 2,300 presidential ads from the two campaigns this year. So if you're getting hit literally like you'd watch a Sunday Night Football game and every single ad was Harris, Trump, Harris, Trump, Harris, Trump. So there comes a saturation point. You only can spend so much money and run so many commercials. The media loves it. Look, they make a killing. They make all kinds of money. They're selling airtime like crazy. Even though there's a reduced rate for political ads, they're still selling them by the truckload. And so you have to wonder, like, how effective are these old traditional TV ads anymore? Direct mail. Does anybody read political direct mail anymore? That costs a lot of money.
Straight in the recycling.
It's all the postage. The mail piece costs nothing. The postage, the post office doesn't give you a big break on political mail.
Right.
So, you have to wonder, like, do those things really, should that really be the focus? Think about the Never Trump groups, the Lincoln Project, the Republican accountability people, how much money they spent, over $100 million. And what did we get? We got 6% of the Republicans to cross over. That's nothing. So, for what do we spend, like $100,000 per Republican voter to get them to cross over, when that money could have been spent maybe in the Latino community?
There's also a lot to be said for the candidate. And let's just talk about the candidate for a moment. Do you believe that Joe Biden, had he have stepped aside a year earlier and given Kamala Harris more than 100 days, that it would have made a difference? Or did the Democrats choose the wrong candidate?
I think there's a good chance, had he done that the nominee would not have been Kamala Harris. That's the thing, I mean, if there had been a wide open primary, I don't know that she beats Gavin Newsom. I doubt that.
What about the other scenario that some people are suggesting, that maybe had he have stepped down as president and allowed her to become the president a year into his tenure, that actually she would have made the case for doing the presidenting her way.
Maybe. I mean, I never thought he was going to run again. Never. I mean, I said when people brought this up to me back in 2020,
Yeah.
like, oh, Biden's too old to do 8 years, I would laugh at them. I'm like, he's not going to do 8 years. There's no way. He's 81 years old. He's whatever he was at the time, like 77.
But
He's
he felt 60, and this is the thing about aging, isn't it? That it suddenly creeps up on you. And apparently, I recently read that we age twice. Like there are two times in our lives when suddenly we age.
This is not making me feel better about anything right now.
Well, happy birthday. There's another issue that we should definitely discuss, and that is that interview that Kamala Harris gave on television when she was asked, is there anything that you would do differently from the Biden administration? How do you separate yourself from Joe Biden? And she gave an answer that shocked a lot of us, which was that she wouldn't do anything differently.
I was shocked because she hadn't done an interview yet. That was like the first one. So she's sitting on the sideline. I think they were overprotective of her. They were didn't have confidence in her. They didn't put her out there right away. So she lost a month. Then she finally gives her a big interview. You have to know, everybody in the universe, it's almost like it's 4th down and 30. You know that they have to throw the ball. They're not going to run the ball. They got to. So the first question is going to be that. Like, is there anything that you would have done differently? And here's what you do. Here's what you do. You go to your boss and you say, Joe, look, I'm going to have to say a few things here. Here's what I'm not going to criticize you, but I'm going to say, I would have maybe done this differently here, this differently here. Pick 3 specific things. And you go to the old man and you say, look, man, this is how it's going to go. Foreign leaders do this all the time.
Right.
Like when Israel's going to bomb something in Iran, they tell us first. They're like, this is what we're going to do next week. So you're ready and you know how to respond to it. And you tell Joe, and Joe's an old pro, man. He knows he's going to go, I get it. Yeah. I understand. You got to do what you got to do.
I won't take it personally.
I won't take it personally. I'd do the same thing. And everything's cool. But I think maybe they felt like they didn't want to go. They were afraid to go to him about something. I don't know what it was. But she just decided, like, no, I'm going to get out there with the president with a 40% approval rating who's never gotten above 41% approval rating. I'm going to say he's been perfect and I wouldn't do anything different. I mean, come on.
So I have a theory on this, Ron, that I've been thinking about. I think that Kamala Harris was pretty thrilled to know that she was going to get this nomination. And I think that she really does adore Joe Biden. I think that there is really a genuine kind of relationship there for her and her husband and for Joe and for Jill. I think that they really are a well-connected and deeply kind of rooted friendship there. And I felt like she may have thought that she would be betraying him if she was to say anything that turned against him. Now, she could have done what you've just suggested and said, look, this is politics, it's not personal. I'm going to need to separate myself from you. But, there was an argument that from a Washington bubble perspective, they thought that they really had a good administration going. And that they thought that they had dealt with everything and that they'd got us out of the pandemic, and that's all that really mattered.
And there was one absolutely perfect issue to do this on: the border.
Right.
Oh, I mean, who's advising these people?
Well, not us, clearly.
Donald Trump's number one issue is the border.
Yeah. We
knew that for 3 years. It's all of his ads. And Harris could have said, like, man, I would have handled the border differently. I could have given her 10 things to do differently on the border. I'll sit down with you and I'll give you 10 things right now. And just pick out a couple things. And you know what? American voters who are upset about the way the border was handled, and they are, despite the fact that like hardcore Democrats are just like unaware that this is a problem. They do care. And she could have just said, you know what? I think we should have handled this differently here, here, and here. Oh, man, that would have been huge, huge for voters. That's exactly what voters wanted to hear from her. And yet she just says, no, everything's good.
I mean, it didn't help that she didn't bat away the border czar line, because remember, she was never the border czar. That was created by the Trump movement. They gave her this title.
Another thing that they set the narrative on.
Right. And so she never denounced being the border czar. She also never corrected the record and said, well, actually, I might not be the border czar, but this is what Biden has tasked me with. And it was actually far more to do with how the countries that were seeing migrants kind of coming through to the US, how they managed the migrants from their end. And it was quite technical, and it was quite complex, and to all intents and purposes, she actually did that job quite well. And there was a lot to celebrate there, there was a lot to celebrate about the technology that Mexico was going to pay for and the advances and changes that they'd made. They didn't talk enough about the judiciary at the border and how a way to reduce the numbers was to see these cases much faster, which meant investing in judges, immigration judges, to actually kind of rubber stamp a lot of these applications. And so I know that people don't want detail, but sometimes we need it, because the detail is the truth. And the truth ultimately is of more value than Donald Trump just making stuff up about this crisis, which should never really be referred to as a crisis, because that is almost like you denying that you can do anything about it.
Here's the thing. Like, they had to know in 2021 and 2022, this is Donald Trump's number one issue. It was his number one issue in 2016, but he couldn't use it in 2020 because he was in charge, right? So you had to know he's chomping at the bit to get back in the game on the border issue, right? The migrant caravans, the whole deal, right? And not only that, he's got the ammo now because migrants are flooding in post-COVID in numbers that we had never seen before. Even at the worst of what it was under past administrations, it was worse than that. And so you have to know that Trump is going to be all over the migrant issue. And so what do? You allow the media to define your VP as a border czar when that is Alejandro Mayorkas's job? And where's Mayorkas? Like, the only time we ever saw Mayorkas was when he's dragged in front of Congress and getting yelled at by Republicans. Like, I think a critical error was not flip-flopping Buttigieg and Mayorkas. Buttigieg should have been DHS. Mayorkas should have been transportation secretary, because transportation secretary, we don't need a dynamic speaker who can go on Fox and kick ass. We don't need that.
Yeah.
And Mayorkas is terrible. He's a terrible communicator. So stick him in transportation. Make Pete the border czar, man. Pete's a tech. Pete can jump in there. He can jump on Fox News. He can battle with the Republicans. Like, I don't understand the personnel there at all. You put Mayorkas in there. I thought Mayorkas was dreadful. Mayorkas was as bad as Merrick Garland. They were the two weak links of this administration, and those two guys hurt this campaign.
Let's talk about Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice for a moment, because, we've all tried to stem our criticism of Garland because we respect the system and we respect the separation of powers, not something that Donald Trump ever did when he had, his DOJ. And so we've tried to allow for everything to take its course in a kind of legal fashion. But it does seem clear now that Merrick Garland slow-walked any investigations of Donald Trump surrounding the insurrection, January 6th, even the classified document theft, to the point that Donald Trump should never have even been allowed to be on the ballot, considering that these crimes are so heinous. I mean, let's use Brazil as an example. Jair Bolsonaro did a very similar thing, right?
Not as bad.
Not as bad, right? There was not as good a riot on the steps of their Capitol building.
That's right. There wasn't.
He got banned from running for office for 8 years.
Yep.
And it happened immediately. And that would happen in most civilized countries. If the leader of the nation refuses the peaceful transfer of power, tries to cling on to power, and instigates a riot.
The findings against him were two things.
Yeah.
That he used government agencies or government airwaves or whatever to claim that he won, and that he sowed doubt about the integrity of the election.
Yeah.
That's it. He didn't organize any insurrection, and they banned him for 8 years, like you said. That's all it took.
Is further proof of the lawlessness of America when it comes to the kind of white collar crime, and our prisons are full of young black men incarcerated for a small wrap of drugs or marijuana. Meanwhile, you've got this kind of wealthy white millionaire who can overturn an election, incite a riot, steal classified documents, share them with an Australian businessman, and then be allowed to run for president again like nothing ever happened.
Yeah. I want to have this discussion at the same time. Like, I see so much today on social media from Democrats.
Yeah.
Blame, putting all their eggs in this basket.
Yeah.
And I agree with what they're saying. Okay. It's pretty obvious based on the reporting that there was no will whatsoever from either Joe Biden or Merrick Garland to prosecute Trump for January 6th. And that they only Garland was finally forced, kicking and screaming, to appoint Jack Smith because of the January 6th public hearing, where the public got to see so much of the evidence and said, what are we doing here? But that was 2 years on, right?
2 years too late.
The problem is, though, I just don't think it's a great idea for Democrats to spend a lot of time on that, because at this point, the time to argue about that is long past. Because once you do that, now you're saying okay, this is why we lost, because of Merrick Garland, instead of taking on why did we lose all these millions of votes this time, because that wasn't because of Merrick Garland.
Okay, so with that in mind, what does the Democratic Party look like from January next year? Once the dust has settled and Trump installs himself in the White House, what is left for the Democratic Party without much sway in the political system? Will there be a change of leadership? I mean, Nancy Pelosi just got reelected, so
no, she will not be in leadership. But I think a lot of it depends on who takes the House, which I don't think we know as of this hour. There's so many races that haven't been called, and it's going to be really close. Actually, I was talking about this with the boys this morning. I actually think it would be better for Democrats to have the Republicans take the House, because you see, if they have the House and the Senate and the White House, Trump has no one else to blame. He's back in 2017 again.
Yes.
Where he can't blame Democrats for anything. And so he's not going to take responsibility, but the American public is going to hold him responsible for anything bad that happens, because you guys control everything. But, what if we control the House? Well, what is that going to do for us? Okay, that might help us a little bit, but we have a divided government. We're going to have to compromise. But that also allows Trump to just blame. Okay, now he's got somebody to blame for everything that goes wrong. It's the House. It's the House. Everything's the House. So I almost think, just from a political perspective, I'm not talking about what's best for the country necessarily. From a political perspective, it'd almost be better for Republicans to control it all and then come roaring back in the midterms, because that has to be our focus. We have to anticipate right now that Trump is going to screw everything up so bad, foreign policy, domestic policy, tariffs, all that stuff, that people are going to be furious, and we have to be ready, because look, in 2026, that's the year that Republicans have a lot of vulnerable senators up in vulnerable places. We can very easily not very easily, but we can, a good chance we're going to take the Senate. So if we take both houses of Congress in 2026, you're basically talking about limiting Trump here to 2 years where he can do anything domestically besides executive orders. So I think that needs to be the focus right now. I mean, if we start thinking about, oh, who's going to be our nominee in 2028, man, that doesn't really need to be the focus right now. That we'll worry about that when it happens. But we need to focus on those midterm elections and resisting and fighting back.
And I think that is important, that we reassure people that, this isn't a 4-year tenure, this is a 2-year tenure, effectively, right, with the midterms. And 2 years will go like that. And that whilst it might seem and feel very painful today, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of sadness, there's been quite a lot of mudslinging that is not particularly helpful, but people are feeling a lot of things today. And struggling. And I think, it's important that we make the point that the pro-democracy movement does not go away. If anything, now is the time that it gets stronger, because so many of our rights, women's rights, trans rights, human rights, are on the line. And it's actually, in these moments that things really do get done. And so, I want to encourage people to stay with the program, to get your membership to the Midas Touch network, to do the work and to remain in this community, because I was feeling very dejected this morning, and I made a video from the 5-minute news audience, and I was just like, look, I know how you feel, because I'm feeling it too. And a lot of people wrote back to me and they were like, we need someone to turn to right now, because it feels like we don't have leadership. Yeah. And I think that in these moments, it's important that we actually see each other as the support, because relying on leadership, leaders change all the time, but we as a movement, a pro-democracy movement, whether it be here on Midas Touch or on 5-Minute News or even your membership to the Democratic Party, we have each other as a community that cares about each other.
Yeah, we know we're not going to get, to me, like that much leadership, I think, from two places. One is Joe Biden, who is just going to focus on Ukraine and getting as much help to them as he can the last 2 months, but knowing that they're going to get cut off. And I have no problem with that. I think that that's a good thing for him to do, but we're not going to hear much from him. And I think we're not going to hear that much from Kamala Harris, because I think that what you just heard from her today was her initial campaign speech for governor of California in 2026. I mean, I think we're going to be her focus. And so I think that it's going to have to come from the grassroots. But one thing that I get distressed about, that I was most disappointed in today, was, because there's going to be finger pointing, but it's the identity politics blame game that's taking place between groups in the Democratic coalition. That's really bothering me. It's the Arabs' fault. It's the Jewish voters' fault. It's the Latino voters' fault. They're all like blaming each other. And, when you point out that like the biggest group that flipped from Democrat to Republican was Latinos, it was a 12-point swing. That doesn't mean that you're blaming Latino voters. I'm not. What I'm saying is, where did we disappoint them? Where did we go wrong? And how can we get them back? Not like, you guys cost us the election. This is what Democrats have to get past,
There's also some very simple messaging points that I feel like this campaign may have missed. And the first is on the economy, to point out the fact that 10 of the last 11 recessions happened in the hands of Republican administrations. That Democrats are much better for the economy than Republicans. The statistics are very clear on this. And the growth has always come under Democratic administrations, and then invariably handed to Republicans, who then crash it and grow the national debt. And I didn't really hear that at all, talking up the record of Democrats.
Not until Obama.
Right. But
Obama was the first one
But
who
that was a
made that
long
argument.
time ago. It might not be for your lifetime, but for a lot of people, 2008 was a long time ago. And
Yeah.
I really am very much of the opinion that we need to rewrite the narrative, because this idea that Republicans are better for the economy when they just grow the national debt and cut tax for the corporate interests, that storyline I didn't hear in this campaign, and will play a whole lot better for people next time around.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the first time we heard that in this campaign was Barack Obama's rally speech like a month ago,
That's right.
where
Yeah, he goes,
that's what I
of
was
course he
saying.
had a good economy. It was my economy.
Yeah, when he stood up and said that, he's like, what is Trump talking about? I inherited a terrible economy, 8 years, turned it around, 6 years consecutive growth, low unemployment. I hand that to Trump. 3 years later, he screws it up. I mean, Joe Biden never said that. Kamala Harris never said that. None of these people said that.
And Biden is about to
do we
do the
have to
same.
bring back Barack Obama to make the best argument?
Biden's about to do the same. He's about to hand a strong economy to Donald Trump.
Here we
to
go
screw
again.
up.
Yeah. And how many infrastructure projects is Trump going to show up at next year with a golden shovel
And take the credit for. Yeah.
right? That were Biden infrastructure.
Look, this is obviously a very reflective and contemplative day, and it's hard. And I'm very conscious that I don't want us to kind of jump on this too soon, because people need to find their equilibrium again. But I do think that it's important that we address some of these issues that are really kind of biting questions for people. Why? What if? What happened? And I think that we've had that opportunity to do so here. And I'm sure in the comments people will make a whole bunch of points that maybe we forgot about. But, ultimately, I think that we do need to be optimistic. I personally found Kamala's speech an hour or so ago a little too optimistic and a little too joyful. And, we've all had family members like that who are just like, laugh it off. Oh, it's going to be fine. But, I also think it's important to recognize that we are all in this together. It's nobody's fault. This is something that we can all do a better job of next time around. And that's the great thing about political systems, that you do get another chance. However, and I'm just going to throw a little spanner into the works now, there is some talk that the administration that we will get in January will not leave. That if he really is the autocrat that it seems he might be, in that relationship with J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel and Heritage and all of that lot, that actually Donald Trump will tear up the Constitution, that Donald Trump will install himself or his cronies, J.D. or whoever else, as a kind of permanent fixture in leadership. Do you think that's something we need to take seriously?
Well, I talked this morning to a pretty well-placed Trump campaign person, staffer, who will be in the administration, fairly high profile. I won't say the person's name, but just called basically to say, like, our campaign had a lot of respect for Midas Touch. You guys heard us, and that's basically what he told me. Like, you guys, and I'm not just saying this to toot our own horn. The guy called me to tell me this, that you guys were the only ones that heard us on social media. We didn't really care about what any other Democratic group was doing. We paid attention to what you guys were doing. And so he called me to tell me that. But in the course of our conversation, he also told me he thinks Trump's learned from his mistakes from the first term. I'm like, who are we talking about here? But he also told me that Trump is going to support J.D. Vance in 2028 and fully get behind Vance. So we'll see.
And arguably Vance is more dangerous than Donald Trump, A, because he has youth on his side, but B, because he is embedded in that Christian nationalist movement that Trump is not. Trump is the populist who will just do and say anything, whereas JD actually has kind of comes to this with some very strong opinions about faith and about women everything else.
Yeah. I think that makes a whole lot of sense for Trump. I mean, he's going to be what, 80
82
something, 83.
Yeah.
I don't even know that he's going to, with his cholesterol, he's going to make it. I think we might be seeing a president. I think that this is what Trump wanted. I don't know. I just kind of feel like he wanted to be free of all of his legal problems, the prosecutions to go away. He's got now his Truth Social stock is back up worth money, a bunch of money again. He can cash some of that out now. And I think I honestly think he'll be ready to go at the end of this term, because I just think he's kind of he'll be out of gas. But hey, I could be wrong. I think as long as he knows that he's got like a trusted, loyal guy who's going to have his back in Vance taking over, I think he'll go. But we'll see.
And Elon Musk, we should probably mention finally, because he did play a huge part in this, in terms of not just the money that he invested in the campaign, but also the use of language. I mean, he was quite explicit in his support for Donald Trump eventually, and with Joe Rogan as well. That kind of really embodied this toxic masculinity and then this kind of anti-woke sentiment that clearly had some effect in this race.
Yeah, that's another subject that I talked to the Trump campaign staffer about, was the Elon Musk subject and how instrumental he was to them. And what their perspective was this. I'll just tell you it from the Trump campaign perspective, which I think is fairly accurate, which is Obama really showed how to use social media and politics effectively for the first time. He was really the first one to do that. And he ran circles around Mitt Romney on social media, and their team did. Same thing in 2016. They dominated Hillary's campaign in the social media sphere, right? So they felt like they owned that space. And then what happened in 2020 was COVID. And a lot of them were shooting their mouth off with COVID conspiracies and getting banned. And a lot of their most effective players in the social media game, I'm not just talking about Twitter, I'm talking about across the board, other platforms, Facebook, Instagram. A lot of them got banned for life. YouTube, their podcasts got shut down because of their COVID disinformation. And what he said was that really hurt us in 2020, and that allowed sort of a level playing field where we felt we had a huge advantage going in, and we lost it because a lot of our people took themselves out of the game and the content moderation happened. And they felt like we were going to have that same problem even worse moving forward, because after January 6th, it was a massive purge. They were all banned. All of them were kicked off social media. So they felt like they were really up against the wall going into this election, and Musk buys Twitter.
Yeah.
And Musk brings them all back.
Yeah.
Fires the whole content moderation team, brings all the right wingers back. They're Alex Jones, Laura Loomer, the whole crew. They're all back. And then Zuckerberg follows suit because he can't be the outlier with everybody else reinstating him. In the meantime, they also built up other platforms like True Social. And Rumble instead of which is their YouTube alternative. So they built their alternative platforms, then got let back onto our platforms. And that's what they told us, is they're like, this whole campaign, we feared no one on the left on social media. We thought that they were all, sort of clownish and cartoonish, and it was all the same herd mentality. And that's why they're saying, like, really, you guys were the only ones that consistently hurt us every day.
Does that mean that we need to set up on Rumble? Because seriously, because what you're describing are these information silos where we operate in our own information bubbles, and that we can bang our heads against the wall, and actually the wrong people are going to hear it, or not the right people are not going to hear it, I should say. And that we would be better off penetrating the right-wing disinformation campaigns by setting up shop on Rumble and just taking the risk of being banned for telling the truth.
I can tell you, like, we are going to move a lot of our stuff from Twitter onto Substack, and that, have it be more subscription based, and you don't have to pay for all the content, but that that is our plan. We wanted to keep everything free and open to everybody during leading up to this election, because we thought that was more important than paying ourselves, but after the election, we want to move stuff onto Substack because we want to build up what we're doing, but also because that's a safe space from Elon Musk and all of his jackals and crazy bots and trolls. If we can build up that platform, this is what we're hoping, that we'll be ready to go in 2 years.
Finally, let's just mention the Russians, because there was some very weird announcements that happened on voting day. To hear that there were bomb threats at polling places coming from Russia in Georgia and elsewhere, that is the weirdest thing, right? To even get to the point where there are bomb threats, which are effectively trying to dissuade people from showing up at the polling place for fear of, getting bombed. Did that surprise you to hear that? And did it surprise you to discover that the intel suggested that this was coming from the Kremlin?
Yeah, this is a new tactic for them, is to target the polling places. Normally they didn't do that in the past. So I was a little upset that the supervisors were shutting down precincts and sending people home temporarily. It might have been their only time to vote, like they have to get back to work or whatever it is, and so they're not necessarily going to come back when it reopens. So my whole thinking was like, I understand on the one hand, like you have to be better, you have to be safe and take threats seriously. But on the other hand, if all it takes is like a guy in Russia to call in a bomb threat and you're shutting down a whole precinct, that we shouldn't do that either. So there needs to be some sort of way of going about this to where this cannot happen. And at the same time, like I don't want Democrats to use that as the excuse why we lost, because I've seen plenty of that on social media that like, oh, well, if the Russians didn't interfere, we would have won. No, we wouldn't have. That if it had been decided by like 8,000 votes in Georgia, I'm with you on this argument, but that wasn't the case. So, this is a problem. This is something we need to deal with and aggressively. But then again, if Donald Trump's the president, is he really going to deal with this problem?
I just finally want to talk about the relationship that voters have with Donald Trump, because, as you know, a lot of my work and interviews and analysis has been about the mental health aspect of this. Not just Trump being mentally ill, but there being a national mental health contagion, a Trump contagion, whereby there is this kind of relationship where, he calls it Trump derangement syndrome, doesn't he? He kind of flipped the narrative on that to say that people are obsessed with Trump. But there is a truth to it. And a therapist wrote to me today, and I just want to read what she put because it's very interesting. She said, as a therapist, I see the electorate in a trauma bond, which happens when a narcissist gets needed narcissistic supply from person or group that has been traumatized. A large portion of the country qualifies as a high ACE score. The rallies, which he kept doing after he was elected because he needed the cheers to feed the narcissistic supply. Anyone that's been in a relationship with a narcissist understands this concept of love bombing, where, they tell you that they need you and that you're amazing and that, they're there for you, and then they pull away. And he did that. He pulled away and said, I don't care about you. I just want your votes. And this happened quite a lot with Donald Trump. And, this is like classic narcissistic behavior. And so we shouldn't rule out the fact, because obviously everyone's looking for everybody to blame, but I would say that this is a clinical issue. This is a national clinical issue. And this is why it's so frustrating that the psychiatrists and the psychologists were effectively banned from the media under that bullshit kind of American psychiatric, the Goldwater rule.
The Goldwater rule.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is just, it doesn't stand up. It just doesn't stand up. And in fact, only 6% of therapists were even members of the APA. But that's not the point. The point is that if we have a more holistic and also scientific analysis of what happened here, we can understand that people felt ignored by politicians for a whole long time, and that they felt like Donald Trump was the closest thing they had to somebody who was saying, I've got you. I've got your back. I see you. And I'm going to help you. Now, the fact that he's not going to do any of those things, he doesn't give a shit about any of those people, is kind of not the point. By then, they'd already been sold in to this kind of love affair, this love-hate affair. And for me, as an onlooker, that really is what I'm left with, is that this is a known condition that people have suffered en masse.
It's a huge difference between the two parties, is that, Republicans have a nonstop traveling road show of conferences, events. You got Reawaken America, you got this group, you got CPAC, you got Trump out there. Trump's been doing rallies for 4 years. Trump started doing rallies his first year after he lost. He was out doing rallies.
Well, he was doing rallies even when he was the president.
People are like, what is he doing? Like, why is he doing rallies? Like, people didn't get it. And I had journalists all the time ask me this question, which is like, why is it that Republicans constantly go to these group events where they're, it's not just Trump rallies. There's so many of them. Every weekend there's like 5 different Republican.
And the church Democrats was also connected to that as well. Yeah.
Democrats don't do it.
Yeah.
And so you have to wonder, like, how we make fun of it. We sort of laugh, and they get all dressed up and they have to sing their songs and they have all their rituals and they sleep out overnight. But you have to wonder, like, it's got to help coalition building. Sure. I mean, a lot of them are nut jobs, but, at the same time, like, they almost revel in the fact that we make fun of them. It's almost like, see how they wear the garbage bags and stuff. They almost like it. And so I don't know how much it helps them to do those things, but you make an interesting point. But here's the other point on that is, we had a little debate about this the other day, which is Trump going to continue to do rallies now that he, kind of knows, like, he's not going to run again, or probably not going to run again. He can't run again, whatever. Is he going to continue to do the rallies? The consensus of the other people, I think, in Midas, is that he is going to do the rallies. And I'm like the one, like, lone. I have no idea if I'm right, but I think he's not. I think he might do like 1 or 2 here or there, but I think he's done with rallies. I don't think he likes doing them anymore like he used to. I think he used to love them, but I really think he's over them, and he doesn't like doing them anymore, and he can't wait to stop doing them.
Well, winning the election for him is the ultimate adoration. And that is his narcissistic supply. And so, he's going to be on high on that for a while. Okay, we have to finish. But Ron, thank you for your analysis as ever. I encourage you to go look at Ron's article that he's written on MidasNews.com. It's called What Went Wrong and How to Fix It. You can download the audio podcast to this episode later on tonight. Don't forget to check out all the details below. You can make comments. Please share this episode if you feel that that's helpful. And we'll come back next Wednesday and do another episode of Uncovered.
Now
We're here for you.
I got to put some vodka in this.
You've got to put something stronger than that. Yeah, I'm going to have a Reese's Piece, which I think is going to be my high for the rest of the day. All right. All the best, Ron. Take care. And thanks to everybody in the Midas community.